I welcome everyone to MEG-12, and we are going to start today with Unit 7 of Block 2, and we'll also try to complete Unit 8. So, Unit 7 talks about two major novelists and poets, and we are going to talk about Margaret Atwood as a poet, especially mentioning about her poem A Sibyl, and we'll also talk about Michael Ondaatje as a poet, and we will talk about the letters and other worlds. And then followed by these two introductions to the two novelists who also were poets. We will also discuss about the collective impact of Atwood and Ondaatje as poets, and then we discuss some important questions. So why we study this unit 7, we discuss about two major novelists as poet. Why do we discuss this unit? We come to know that we have to understand their respective poetic contribution. We have to know that, and we also have to verify how briefly they have touched upon our lives as well. So let's start first with Margaret Atwood, and a little bit about Margaret Atwood introduction before we discuss about her poem A Sibyl. Margaret Atwood was born in Ottawa on 18th November 1939, and she's one of the Canada's best known writers. She's the author of a number of novels, also of which Surfacing is one of the better known ones. Recently, she won the Booker's Prize for her novel, The Blind Assassin. She studied in Victoria College, University of Toronto, and had her master's degree from Harvard. Starting with the University of British Columbia, Vancouver, Canada in 1964, she has taught at many places. She later became a full-time writer, and she is also one of the most celebrated and influential literary figures in Canada and also global literature. As a novelist, poet, literary critic, and essayist, her work spans multiple genres, including dystopian fiction, historical fiction, speculative fiction, and also poetry. While she is widely known for her novels such as The Handmaid's Tale and Elia's Grace, her poetry remains a vital part of her literary identity. Atwood's poetic work exhibit a deep understanding of human psychology, relationships, power structures, and the environment, making her one of the most versatile writers of all her time. Now, if we talk about her poetic themes and styles, her poetry reflects her sharp intellectual depth and keen perception of human nature. Her poetic themes are deeply rooted in societal issues, personal experiences, and political concerns. Some of the major themes that frequently appear in her poetry are about identity and self exploration. Atwood's poetry often explore themes of self-identity, the complexities of human consciousness, and the process of self-discovery. She examines how individuals perceive themselves in relationships to others and how society dictates identity. Her works frequently feature introspective voices, questioning their own existence and purpose. For example, in her poem, This is a Photograph of Me, Atwood uses an unsettling image of a submerged woman to comment on invisibility, erasure, and the struggle for self definition. The poem subtly critiques how history and society often ignore or diminish certain voices, particularly those of women. Now, there had been power dynamics and feminism as well. One of the defining aspects of Atwood's literary career in her engagement with feminist themes, which also extend to her poetry, is the power dynamics and feminism. She critiques gender roles, patriarchal oppressions, and the ways in which power structures control women's lives. Her poetry collection, Power Politics, excuse me, is a striking example of this theme. The collection explores the theme, and it is also considered to be unequal power struggles between men and women in relationships. Atwood does not merely depict women as passive victims, instead, She portrays them as aware of the power imbalances and sometimes even complicit in them. A famous excerpt from Power Politics. You fit into me like a hook into an eye, a fish hook, an open eye. These lines exemplify Atwood's ability to create unsettling imagery with minimal words. At first glance, the line suggests an intimate romantic connection. However, the metaphor shifts suddenly to depict pain and entrapment, revealing the darker undercurrents of relationships. We also find nature and environmental concerns in Atwood's poetry. Since she has a deep ecological consciousness and her poetry often reflects concerns about environmental destruction, the relationship between humans and nature, and the exploitation of natural resources. Her collection, The Animals in That Country, written in 1968, illustrates her concern for nature and the shifting dynamics between humanity and the environment. Atwood critiques the way humans dominate nature, portraying animals and landscapes not as mere backdrops but as active participants in the world's struggles. She revisits environmental themes in later works, particularly in her speculative fiction novels like Oryx and the Crake, but her poetry first introduced these concerns in a raw and a lyrical manner. Now, if we talk about more roles of mythology and history in her poems, we come to know that Atwood frequently draws from history, mythology, and folklore to construct poetic narratives that resonate with contemporary issues. She often retells myths from a feminist perspectives, giving voice to female characters who were traditionally sidelined or silenced. In Morning in the Burnt House, written in 1995, she revisits historical and mythological themes, reinterpreting them to reveal new meanings. Her poetry often plays with time, drawing connections between past injustice and modern struggles. Now, uh, when we discuss about A Sibyl by Margaret Atwood, when we try to analyze and interpret the poem, we come to know that a Sibyl is a compelling piece that reflects her characteristic themes of prophecy, fate, and the limitations of human existence. The title itself alludes to the ancient Sibyls, female prophets or oracles in Greek and mythology, especially Roman mythology, who were believed to possess divine knowledge but often faced suffering due to their foresight. In Atwood's poetry, mythology is frequently used as a lens to explore contemporary issues. In A Sibyl, she reimagines the prophetic voice, possibly reflecting on the burden of knowledge, the constraints of the time, and the struggle of human conditions. Let's explore the theme. As we explore the theme, we come to know there is a burden of knowledge. And in mythology, sibyls were gifted with the ability to see future, yet their prophecies were often cryptic and tragic. Atwood's A Sibyl examines the weight of knowing what is to come. It raises questions such as: is foreknowledge a gift or a curse? Can one change the course of fate, or are we powerless against it? Atwood may be using the figure of the Sibyl to reflect on the role of writers and poets themselves, observers of city or society who foresee dangers, for example, environmental destruction, oppression, war, but often struggle to make others listen. Atwood frequently engages with the feminized themes, and a Sibyl can be read as a reflection on the suppression of women's voices. Many ancient Sibyls were either ignored, misunderstood, or ridiculed, much like how women's warnings and insights have historically been dismissed. A poem could be drawing parallels between the Sibyl's fate and that of a woman who speak uncomfortable truths. One of the most famous Sibyls from mythology is the Cumanian Sibyl, who, according to a legend, was granted eternal life by Apollo but forgot to ask her eternal youth. She aged endlessly, shrinking into a frail husk while still possessing prophetic power. Atwood might be using this myth to comment on the passage of time, the fear of aging, and the struggle of remaining relevant as one grows older. There is no connection, there is an absolute connection to Atwood's broader ecological concerns. The world itself, much like the Sibyl, which is aging and deteriorating while people ignore its warnings. Now, Atwood poetry is known for its concise yet striking imagery, and Sibyl is no exception. Some key poetic techniques that she employs include minimalistic, precise language. Atwood often conveys powerful ideas in a few carefully chosen words, leaving room for interpretation. In Jambint, the flow of the poem from one line to another mimics the urgency of the Sibyl's speech as if time is running out. Symbolism is also an important metaphor for wisdom, warning, and isolation. Now, what is a connection of Atwood's Sibyl into larger themes? Now, her interest in myth and prophecy extends beyond the poem. Many of her works include her novels use mythological archetypes to critique modern society. For example, The Handmaid's Tale explores the Cassandra-like fate of Offred, a woman whose knowledge is ignored by a society that seeks to control her. The Penelopade, the retelling of the Odyssey from Penelope's perspective, gives voice to a female character perceived previously, which was overshadowed by a male dominated narrative. Her poetry collections, such as The Duo and The Morning in the Burnt House, often use mythical and historical figures to reflect on contemporary struggles. Now, A Sibyl is a powerful poem that encapsulates many of Atwood's recurring concerns: women's voices, prophecy, time, and the limitations of knowledge. By drawing on the ancient figure of the Sibyl, she reminds readers the truth tellers throughout history have been ignored, but their warnings remain important. The poem can be interpreted in multiple ways: as a reflection on the loneliness of foresight, as a female critic of silencing women's wisdom, and as an ecological warning about ignoring signs of destruction. Ultimately, Atwood's A Sibyl is a haunting and a thought provoking piece that exemplifies Atwood's mastery of poetic storytelling. Now, this was about Atwood. We discussed about the poem A Sibyl, and the next poet that we are going to discuss about is Michael Ondaatje as poet, and we are going to discuss about the poem Letters and Others World. And we have to introduce Michael. We have to get to know who is Michael Ondaatje. Michael Ondaatje, born in Sri Lanka in 1943. He studied in England and then moved to Canada in 1962. His major poetic works include Dainty Monsters, written in 1967, Rat Jelly, 1973, and Cinnamon Peeler, 1990. His style is surreal, chaotic, and dynamic, and he has a sense of the other which often leads to a poetry of vivid gestures. Ondaatje also, like Atwood, has been a model and an inspiration for the development of the neo-surrealist method in Canadian poetry. One difference is that whereas the women novelist sticks to a monotone to underline a bizarre shift in image, Ondaatje brings together a shifting voice and unpredictable juxtapositions. His well-known hybrid work, the collected works of Billy the Kid, especially the Letters and Other Worlds by Michael Ondaatje, has been versed into 7 paragraphs. What roughly constitutes the first half of the poem talks about the elegy of the poet's father, and as and how we proceed, we come to know that he came to his death by first drowning his mind and then shutting himself in a room with 2 bottles of gin and then how the poet's father early life was terrifying comedy. Mother was newsy to her in her own way, and past then there are 14 years of marriage of his parents, and finally he comes back to his father's letters. First, we are told that both parents claim to be the injured party in their years of marriage. With his penchant for doing odd things, the father has dived into the waters of the harbor at Colombo docks. This was when the poet's parents were saying goodbye to a recently married couple. The mother, pretending no affiliation, mingled with the crowd on the way back to the hotel. Now, this is the overall gist of the poem. However, we will study about detailed exploring the poem and also understanding the influence on literature and society that Ondatse had provided during his period of time. Now, let's understand first Michael Ondatse, who is Canada's most celebrated literary figures and also known for his poetic and narrative brilliance. He is recognized for his novels The English Patient and Anil's Ghosts. His poetry holds an equally significant place in his body of work. One of his important poetic works, Letter and Other Worlds, that we are going to discuss, reflect themes of memory, personal history, loss, and the power of literature to preserve human experiences. This poem stands as a meditation on writing and existence, offering an intimate view of his father's life and the emotional and literary burdens that come with being a writer. Now, Letters and Other Worlds is one of Michael Ondatse's most introspective and moving poems. It is part of his larger exploration of personal and family history, particularly the life of his father, which is also seen in Running in the Family, his memoir written in a mix of poetry and prose. The poem speaks about his father's letters, which become a symbol of lost connections, memory, and the struggle of understanding one's past. The central theme, letters as a link between past and present. The poem revolves around the metaphor of letters as a way of remembering and understanding the past. These letters, presumably written by Ondatse's father, serve as fragments of his life, reflecting emotions, struggles, and unspoken thoughts. Ondatse uses the idea of letters to explore the relationship between fathers and sons, the role of writing in preserving memory, and the difficulty of truly knowing someone even through their words. The letters, I'll put the letters in the quote, in the title as are not just physical letters but also a representation of all forms of recorded memory in the form of stories, poems, or histories that shape our understanding of the past. Undages often writes about his family's history, especially the legacy of his father. And in A Letter and Other Worlds, Ondaatje contemplates the distance between himself and his father, both emotional and physical. The letters act as remnants of a man who is no longer fully present in Ondaatje's life. There is an underlying sense of longing, a desire to connect with the past, but also frustration at the gaps in understanding. His father, through these letters, become both familiar and distant, yet elusive. And this personal exploration is significant because it speaks to a universal human experience, the struggle to understand our loved ones and the realization that written words, no matter how powerful, can never fully capture a person's existence. Another important aspect in the poem is the literature part as a means of survival and connection. Ondatse, as a writer, is deeply aware of the way words shape reality. However, he also acknowledges the limitations of writing. While letters and literature preserve moments, they cannot fully recreate the past. There's a tension between the writer's desire to capture reality and the impossibility of doing so completely. The poem reflects on the burden of being a writer, especially when dealing with a deeply personal subjects like family and loss. In this sense, other worlds in the title can refer to the world of memory and imagination that the writer creates, the different perspective of reality, the writers, the fathers, and the readers. Throughout the letters and other worlds, there is a quiet but powerful sense of loss. The father is gone, and only his letters remain. The poem grapples with how to try to hold on to people through their words, but ultimately have to accept that they exist beyond our understanding. Ontages portrays the inevitability of time and change. Memories fade, people leave, but words remain as incomplete traces of the past. This theme of loss and fragmentation is central to much of his work, especially in his novels, where fragmented narratives and shifting perspective mirror the difficulty of fully grasping history and identity. Literary techniques in the poem include rich imagery, fluid style, and emotional depth, use of letters as a metaphor for memory, and the technique mirrors the way memory works, like disjointed, fluid, and sometimes unreliable. There is an interplay between past and present. Ondatse moves between past memories and his present reflections, highlighting how history continues to shape our lives. The blurred boundaries between poetry and storytelling, whether it is the exploration of personal and collective history or the struggle to capture reality through words, there is a deep emotional and psychological layer of human relationships. That is what the poem is significant of understanding the Ondaatje's literary journey, because it reflects many of the themes that defined his career. Now, Ondaatje's style, with his rich imagery, fragmented structure, and emotional intensity, makes Letters and Other Worlds just not a personal piece but a universal one, reminding us of the ways in which we all seek to connect with those who have lost us or we have lost them through words that remain even when people do not. Now, we discussed two great artistic novelists who are also poets, Margaret Atwood, and we discussed about Michael Ondaatje. Now we come to study about the impact, the impact and of Margaret Atwood and Michael Ondaatje as a poet, the collective impact. So both of them are two of the most influential literary figures in Canadian literature. Though widely known for their novels, they have given significant contributions to poetry as well. The poetic works offer profound insights into the themes such as identity, power, history, memory, and human relationships. Together, Atwood and Ondaatje have shaped contemporary Canadian poetry and literature in distinct yet complementary ways. Atwood's poetry is often sharp, ironic, and politically engaged, while Ondaatje's poetry is more lyrical, evocative, and intimate. However, both poets share a deep interest in the human condition, the nature of storytelling, and the intersections between history and personal experiences. This discussion explores their collective impact as poets, focusing on their themes, stylistic approaches, and influence on literature and society. While their poetic style differs, Atwood and Ondaatje explore overlapping themes that have shaped modern poetry and Canadian literature. Atwood's poetry often examines the fragmented nature of identity, particularly in relationship to gender, politics, and societal expectations. Her feminist perspective critiques how identity, especially female identity, is shaped and constrained by cultural forces. And Ondaatje's poetry, on the other hand, explores identity through memory and personal history. His work frequently contemplates the self as something fluid, shaped by past experiences and relationships. Both poets challenge fixed notions of selfhood, emphasizing transformation and the complexity of personal history. Atwood's A Sibyl presents a figure burdened by knowledge, reflecting on identity through the lens of prophecy and isolation, while on Daci's Letters and Other Worlds reflects on personal and familial identity, using letters as metaphor for memory and self-understanding. Both poets engaged with history, but in different ways. Atwood often critiques history, exposing its biasness, silences, and injustices, especially in relationship to gender and power. And Ondaatje's approach is more introspective and personal. His poetry is concerned with how history shapes individual lives and how memory preserves or disturbs the past. Both poets use fragmented storytelling techniques to reflect on the insatiability of historical narratives. Atwood is famous for her sharp critique of political and social oppression, particularly through feminism and dystopian lenses. Her poetry often examines the dynamics of power and control. Ondaatje's poetry, while less overtly political, also explores themes of dominance and marginalization, particularly in colonial and post colonial contexts. Both poets use personal narratives to reflect on broader social struggles. Atwood and Ondaatje both engage with the nature of writing itself, its power, its limitations, and its responsibilities. Atwood often critiques language as a tool of control, while also using it to subvert and challenge authority. Contagiate, in contrast, treats language as a form, an art form, emphasizing its sensory and lyrical qualities. His poetry is deeply concerned with the materiality of words, the way they sound, the way they evoke images. Atwood's poetry is often direct, unembellished, and cutting. She employs irony, sarcasm, and wit to expose societal flaws. Her poems are usually structured in short, tight lines with sharp imagery and little ornamentation. She often challenges the reader with provocative, unsettling language that forces engagement with difficult themes. Ondaatje's poetry is more fluid, evocative, and immersive. His lines flow with rich imagery, musicality, and emotional depth. He frequently uses long descriptive passages, creating a dreamlike quality in his work. His poetry often feels like storytelling, blending poetic form with a strong narrative presence. Their influence on literature and society is impactful, and both of them have left a long lasting impact not just in poetry but on overall literature and cultural discourse as a whole. Atwood works helped define Canadian literature as socially conscious, politically engaged, and critical of colonial history and gender inequality, and on Ondaatje expanded Canadian literature rich by incorporating global influences, particularly his Sri Lankan heritage, into his poetic and narrative structures. Now, together, both of them are important voices in contemporary poetry. Through their styles, although different, their collective impact on literature is profound. So, we are done with Unit 7. Some of the important questions under this unit can be comment on the collective contribution of Atwood and Ondaatje to recent Canadian poetry. Another question can be, in what ways does Atwood use a sibyl to talk about the speaker's own predicament? And the third question can be, what picture of Ondaatje's father emerges from his poem, letters, and other worlds? So, this is the end of Unit 7. We start with Unit 8. Before that, I'll take a break of 2 minutes just to have some water, and then we begin with Unit 7, Unit 8. So, let's begin with Unit 8. In Unit 8 of Block 2, we study five other important poets. Five other important poets, and we study about Earl Burney, we study about Earl Purdy, we study about Ellie Mandel, Thomas King, and Dorothy Livesey. The objective of understanding or reading Earl Burney, Purdy, Ellie Mandel, Thomas King, or Dorothy Livesey is to analyze what they exactly represented. For example, The Bear on the Delhi Road by Earl Burney, Elegy for a Grandfather. For example, Envoy by Ellie Mandel, Coyote Sees the Prime Minister by Thomas King, and The Green Rain by Dorothy Livesey. So before that, we need to understand the kind of writers they are, the kind of writers they are. And we also discuss about the how each of these poets brought unique perspectives or styles or any kind of thematic concerns of their work, which reflected the richness and diversity of Canadian literature tradition. One thing which is mostly common in the um, all the five poets is that their poetry not only captures um, the historical, cultural, or personal dimensions of Canada, but it also continues to inspire future generations of poets and readers alike. So let's begin. We first start with Earl Burney, and he was born in 1904 and he passed away in 1995. He was a significant figure in Canadian poetry, often credited with shaping the modern poetic landscape of Canada. He was known for his innovative use of free verse and conversational tone, which broke away from traditional poetic forms. Burmese poetry is marked by mostly the literary contributions or style through an experimental way, use of colloquial language, and a deep concern for social and historical issues. He played a crucial role in establishing Canadian literature as an independent and distinct entity, advocating for a unique Canadian poetic voice. His poetry often reflected his deep understanding of human emotions and his appreciation of the Canadian landscape. He was among the early Canadian poets to embrace free verse, giving his poetry a natural, flowing quality. Most of his notable works are David, that was written in 1942, one of the Burmese most famous poems, narrating a tragic story of friendship and loss in Rocky Mountains. Another was Bushed, that was written in 1951, a powerful poem um, narrating a tragic story of um, psychological struggle against isolation in the wilderness. And the most commonly, The Bear on the Delhi Road, a symbolical piece of addressing themes of colonialism, humanity, and oppression. So we try to discuss about The Bear on the Delhi Road, and it's a very interesting poem where we see that Bunny is talking about a Himalayan bear on a Delhi road, and he is unreal, that is, away from his natural habitat. He is very tall. Two bare, thin men accompany him on the road, and he beats the air with his crooked arms. The paragraph has different verses, exactly five verses. There are these two men who pull on a ring in the soft great nose of the bear, and his companion, that is the second one, flicks with a stick up at the rolling eyes of the bear. Now, as we move ahead, we come to know that the purpose of these two men is to teach the bear to dance. That is why they have led him here down from the fabulous Himalayan hills to the Baldalian plain and the clamorous world of Delhi. They do not want to kill him, but to help them earn their living. As we move ahead in the fourth verse of the paragraph, we come to know that these two men from Kashmir are peaceful. All they want is a living. They want the bear to stay alive. They dance around him on Delhi Road in a galvanic way. They want to wear out from his shaggy body the wish to stay forever on four legs amidst berries. They want him to be like them on two legs and dance. And as we finish with the poem, we come to know that what they are doing does not give them much joy. They are also away from Kashmir's cool air in the hot dust of Delhi. So the relationship or the condition of both bear and these two men who are trying to tame the bear is almost similar. Whether you are a human or from an animal kingdom, the situation is not same but although very similar to each other. So we'll go move ahead to the next poet who is Al Purdy and who was born on Wooler, Ontario. His works are Caribou Horses, collected poems, Women on the Shore, The New Romance, No Other Country, A Splinter in the Heart, and all of them are written from 1965 till 1990. We are going to focus on the elegy for a grandfather, where it's Alpadi's poem. Elegy for a grandfather consists of four verse paragraphs and mostly of uneven lengths, where Purdy uses some figures of speech to characterize his dead grandfather and also gives his reaction to the real or pretended sorrow shown by his relatives. The grandfather was a big man and had wide hips. He had a big belly and was like a pharaoh. He had a Presbyterian green and carried a deck of cards in his pocket. As we move ahead, we come to know Purdy states that all that his grandfather was too much of any man to be. His life was too full and eventful. The scandal about him was that he lived on rotten whiskey and died on Quaker roads at the age of 90 or so. And towards moving towards the final part of the poem, Purdy talks about the church service done by the priest. He says that his grandfather was a barn raiser and a backward farmer. He lived his whole life in one room apartment over a dry goods store. The earth takes him as it takes more beautiful things. Among such things, Purdy enumerates populations of whole countries, museums, and works of art, and beautiful women. And in the last paragraph, Purdy calls his grandfather decidedly unbeautiful and says that he was 250 pounds of a scarred slag. About himself, Purdy says that he has somehow become his grandfather's memory. This memory has the capacity to survive and outline even works of art. On the whole, Purdy's elegy, his grandfather, is a down to earth tribute. Moving ahead to the next poet, Elie Mandel, we discuss about the major works, for example, Envoy. Besides other writings like Dreaming Backwards, Another Time, The Family Romance, were all written between 1981 till 1986. But Envoy talks about a French word. Envoy is a French word which means dispatch. The poet says that country is not a country but winter rivers of ice. Though the whiteness of his veins run terrible knives from Saint Hubert. The poet says that politics pierces his heart on a floor littered with history. He says that he shivers while wardens shovel in lunatic sentences, rag upon rag. He says of Quebec that there must be cold in prison. He then asks the hurt singer as to what he sees through the pain of his heart. Next, as we move, we come to know Mandel offers an image of icy slave circling the river and the city of Montreal tense against the steel of his chain. And as we move towards the closing of the poem, we know that the singer and his words, which drift like frozen wounds, bless a sick bride. The bridegroom is murderous. The wedding is in question is one whose children are likely to be colder killer than what this or any other song suggests. Elemental forcefully captures the coldness. and a cold blooded quality which has seeped into Canadian life. Then we discuss about Thomas King, whose main novels are Medicine River, Green Grass, Running Water, and many more. Most of them written from 1989 till 1933. And the most important reference of Thomas King goes to Coyotes, he is the Prime Minister. One of the Thomas King's most famous poems, and it is a short, pithy poem, one of the most remarkable poems to come from Canada in recent times. It has layerings of irony, and the irony is devastating. But first, we need to know a little about Coyote. It's a trickster figure in Canadian oral literature. The whole history of exploitation and extermination of natives gets telescoped here. What is also attacked is a wide tendency to treat everything in terms of solution and problems. It's a grim story whose ending gets spoiled by Eltwood's laughing when telling the story. The problem has been solved. So, what's the problem? Here, typography is very important. When King wants to put extra emphasis on the word, he capitalizes it. So, as a core of King's poem, Coit is saying, sure, what's the problem? In response to Prime Minister's statement, maybe you can help us solve the Indian problem. The irony in here is maybe as well as an approach that is always solving problems of various kinds. But what's the problem in this context? Works at many levels where there is poet's own statement. I wouldn't make this up. The interposing of this between makeup is a very effective move because it touches upon the traditional image of natives as though who makes things up. The play on happy and laughs held by the capitalization adds to the richness in the edge of the irony which the poem uses in structure of remarkable economy and tautness. Then we study about Dorothy Livesey. Dorothy Livesey major works include Green Picture, Signpost, Day and Night, Poems for People, The Unique Bed, Paint Songs, Collected Poems, Beginnings, The Raw Edges, Journey with Myself, all written from 1928 to 1991. This is a poem where memory or remembering the memories of rain and of speaker's beloved one. There is also the memory of the speaker's grandmother. She remembers the grandmother's shawl, her house, and the parlor in that house. The rain is remembered as the feathery fringe of her shawl. And in the poem, there are majorly three verse paragraphs. The first one talks of veils of green wren. An analogy is established between those veils and shawl of the speaker's grandmother. Rain is green from the half green of the spring trees waving in the valley. All this the speaker remembers. The second verse paragraph talks to the road which she remembers. This is like the road that leads to her grandmother's house. Details of the house are then given. It is a warm house with a green carpet. There is a geraniums, a singing canary, and shining chairs. There is silence. What fills the silence is the rains falling. Her parlor was alive with herself and her rising and falling voice. Rain and wind intermingled there and on that road. And as we move to the last paragraph in the poem, we could see that the speaker brings in her love and his house. She says that she remembers that on that day she was thinking only of her love and his house. Now she remembers the day and she remembers her grandmother. The sum total is that she remembers the rain as the feathery fringe of her grandmother's shawl. Now, these five poems by five representative poets cannot adequately give us an idea of the range of themes and style which Canadian poetry has to offer. Still, one does not get a feel of the whole domain. Poems chosen are relatively short. There are practical problems in going for the longer ones. Analysis of the poems has been not quite extensive in that the idea is to familiarize the all of you with the thematic range. We have not gone too much into the stylistic niceties. These self-imposed limitations are partly in keeping with the demands of a course which is essentially in a survey course. So that is what you need to all understand. And important questions of this part can be: how does Bernie react to the sight of bear on a Delhi road? Is the tone of Purdy's tribute to his grandfather purely reverential, or is there an ironic touch in it? What aspect of Canada's weather does Mandel stress in Envoy? How does Thomas King deploy irony in Coetzee is the Prime Minister? And what is Dorothy Lipsey's The Green Rain mainly about? Questions will be very direct, and you'll come to know that you just have to be thorough with um, the understanding of the writings, understanding of how the poets have absolutely mixed fascination or you know kind of fascination towards their work of art. So in the bear on the Delhi road, Albany reacts with a mixture of fascination, sympathy, and unease. He observes the bear, wild creature, being forced into an unnatural existence as it performs tricks under human control. The poem conveys themes of captivity, colonialism, and tension between nature and human dominance. Bunny's depiction of the bear, shackled and subdued, evokes a sense of pathos, making the reader reflect on the loss of freedom and the cruelty of such exploitation. His reaction is not just one of the simple observation, but of deep contemplation of power dynamics and oppression. Alberti's elegy for a grandfather carries a tone that is both reverential and subtly ironic. While the poet respects and honors his grandfather's life, there is an undercurrent of irony in the way Purdy portrays the contrast between the mythic, larger than life figures of his grandfather and the more mundane realities of his life. The poem reflects on how time and memory shape perceptions of people, sometimes idealizing them beyond their real essence. But he often employs irony in his works, making his tributes more nuanced rather than purely sentimental. In Envoy, Elemental highlights the harshness and the relentlessness of Canada's weather. He focuses on how the cold and isolation influence human experience and emotions, reflecting themes of survival and endurance. The poem captures the stark, sometimes unyielding nature of the Canadian landscape, using the weather as a metaphor for broader existential struggles. Mandel's imagery often conveys a sense of detachment and longing, mirroring the broader themes of exile and displacement that recur in his work. Thomas King uses irony in Coetzee as the Prime Minister by contrasting indigenous perspectives with political rhetoric. The poem critiques the superficial engagement of politicians with indigenous issues, using Coete, a trickster figure in indigenous mythology, to expose hypocrisy and empty promises. By placing the mythical coyote in a modern political setting, King creates a humorous but pointed commentary on how indigenous concerns are often dismissed or manipulated for political gain. The irony lies in the absurdity of the situation, revealing deeper truths about power and representation. Dorothy Lipp says the green rain is primarily about memory, nostalgia, and the passage of time. The poem evokes a vivid sense of place, using rain as a symbol of renewal and continuity in nature. Through rich imagery and sensory detail, Livesey reflects on the past, blending personal emotions with the natural world. The poem's tone in both melancholic and celebratory, capturing the enduring beauty of nature and its connection to human experience. Now, these are some of the important questions from Unit 8 that we discussed. Going back to Unit 7, important questions that are: comment on the collective contribution of Artwood and Ondatse to recent Canadian poetry. In what way? In what way does Artwood uses a symbol to talk about the speaker's own predicament? And what picture of Ondatse's father emerges from his poem Letters and Other Worlds? The collective contribution is well defined, um, is a well defined significant role that both of them had provided or in shaping the contemporary Canadian poetry. Collective impact, where both of them have expanded the thematic and the stylistic range of Canadian poetry. Atwood brings a sharp critical voice to social and political issues, while Ondatse experimental approach adds depth to poetic storytelling. Together, they have helped elevate Canadian poetry to international recognition, inspired new generations of poets to explore both personal and national identity through innovative literary techniques. And Artwade Sibyl uses the figure of a Sibyl, a prophetess from Greek mythology, to reflect on the speaker's own struggle with aging, loss of agency, and the burden of knowledge. The poem conveys a sense of entrapment as a Sibyl is doomed to live forever but without youth. Her prophetic abilities becoming both a gift and a curse. Speaker in the poem identifies with the Sibyl's fate, feeling trapped by the expectations and limitations imposed by society. This could symbolize a writer's burden of forcing societal changes, yet feeling powerless to alter them. It may also reflect the universal human anxiety about mortality and the struggle to find meaning in a world that disregards wisdom in favor of transient pleasures. The poem explores the theme of isolation, as Sybil's voice, once referred to, becomes ignored. This mirrors the speaker's concern about losing influence or being disregarded despite their insight. Atwood also critiques how societies treat aging individuals, especially women, after reducing them to the mere relics of their former selves. The poem can be read as a feminist statement on the erasure of women's voices with time. Overall, a Sibyl is a meditation on power, prophecy, and the existential burden of knowing what the future holds without the means to change it. What picture of Ondatse's father emerged from his poems, Letters and the Other Worlds? Michael Ondatse constructs a complex and a deeply personal portrait of his father. The poem reflects on the fragmented and the elusive nature of memory, and the speaker attempts to piece together an understanding of his father's life through letters and recollections. Excuse me. Ondasis portrays his father as a man of charm and intelligence, but also one who was deeply troubled. He appears to have been charismatic yet distant, a figure shaped by both his strengths and weaknesses. His struggles with alcohol and personal demons emerge through the poem, painting a picture of a man caught between moments of brilliance and self destruction. The father is depicted as both familiar and unknowable, someone who left behind traces of his existence in letters but remains difficult to fully grasp. This reflects the poet's struggle to connect with a father whose life and choices were often shrouded in mystery. The poem is ultimately a meditation on loss and imperfect nature of memory. So, Here we complete with the important questions of Unit 7 and Unit 8, and we are done with Block 2. Today is 21st of February, and we meet again on 24th of February to begin with Block 3, and again we discuss with the important units, Unit 9 and Unit 10, and then we proceed ahead. Thank you so much.